Radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. It is 12 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary's in Rwanda discussing the £140 million deal to send illegal migrants to the country. Suella Braverman says the plan, which has been criticised, will act as a powerful deterrent for those making dangerous journeys across the Channel. She visited long-term accommodation sites, which will house both refugees and Rwandans, as well as a training and education centre, where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Well, rail passengers are facing another day of disruption because of strike action. Thousands of RMT members at 14 train operators are on picket lines across the country. It's the second 24-hour strike in the space of 3 days. Services will start later and finish earlier than usual. And Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, says transport ministers need to follow the lead of other government departments.
We need a change. We need the government to make a change in attitude. There's a bit of that this week we've seen in the health service and maybe in the teachers' unions. The difference in those deals is that there are no conditions. It's new money, but our members are having to swallow or expected to swallow vast changes to their working conditions, and they're not prepared to do that in order to get a very modest, poor pay rise.
The US president's backing the decision by the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Joe Biden says the Russian president has clearly committed war crimes in Ukraine. Now, the Kremlin has described the decision as outrageous and meaningless because it doesn't recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC. The arrest warrant comes ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow on Monday. Historian Patrick Benham-Cresswell told GB News China's influence on Russia is on the rise.
China is de facto Russia's biggest trading partner, both ways. It's its biggest importer of Russian goods and it's the biggest exporter to Russia. So China alone carries great influence, probably more than anyone else, with Putin. And the thinking is that this war was as much a surprise to China as it was to the rest of the world.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is due to appear in court on charges of corruption. Police stormed his residence in Lahore earlier this morning and arrested several of his supporters. Khan's appearance in court follows days of standoffs outside his property, with police attempting to arrest him on Tuesday. The RAC says diesel drivers are not saving money with the fuel duty freeze, despite retailers making more profit. It says major fuel retailers are not reducing their prices, despite the fuel rates they pay falling to a 15-month low. The company also found retailers are taking an average profit margin of nearly 19 pence for every litre they sell. That is compared with 9 pence last year. A new survey suggests demand for foreign holidays has recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The poll by the travel association ABTA indicates nearly two-thirds of Britain are planning a foreign holiday this year, with travel up 16% in the last 12 months. The trade group says many travel agents have seen record sales this year, with holidays remaining a spending priority despite the cost of living crisis. Travel correspondent Simon Calder told us it's great news for the industry.
Yes, demand is back to pre-pandemic levels, that actually 62% of us have had a holiday in the past year abroad, and that number is set to increase. So very good news for the travel industry, arguably very good news for the traveller who is desperate to make up for lost sunshine. But unfortunately, of course, as you say, the cloud on the horizon is the passport strike.
That is it for the moment. Now it's time for Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. A very good afternoon to all of you. And today we focus on the budget, and especially on pensions, on childcare and on corporation tax. Jeremy Hunt's budgets are big deals, economically and politically. And when you see that they reduce Prime Minister's questions to a warm-up act, well, you get my drift. Budgets address what the government plans to spend its money on, our money that is, and how they intend to pay for it. They also set the political weather for the following few months, and in this case, that it takes us perilously close to the general election makes it even more interesting. Budgets also prompt a few days of open debate when backbenchers on all sides can hail their heroes or put the boot in. Well, the scene was set by the Chancellor's growth speech just a few weeks ago. A return to growth, he said, reduced borrowing and curbing inflation. Well, there was some good news on all three, but not totally home and dry yet. Growth was confirmed to be sluggish, but growth there would be. He was sure that we would avoid a deep and lengthy recession. Inflation is certainly sharply down, which should see interest rates fall or rise less rapidly. But that, of course, is up to the Independent Bank of England. We also know that getting people back to work and stopping some calling it a day early is a key government objective. Thus, billions of your money for better childcare, help so that couples with children, both of whom want to work, might find that a little bit easier. Plus, a remarkable reform of private pensions, so folk can put more in with tax advantages and take more out with less tax being taken from them. That was aimed at senior doctors, we were told, though it was savaged by the Labour Party as a multi-billion-pound giveaway to the Tories' rich buddies. And in our People's poll this morning, 58% of the public have said that they feel worse off since the last general election. And when asked about those pension reforms, 23% said that they supported them, against 26% who said they didn't. The rest were still mulling it over and as yet remain unsure. On childcare, one of Labour's standout themes, Labour said that what Jeremy Hunt had offered simply wasn't enough and will take too long to kick in. They promised that they would do away with it were they to form the next government. Now, the rise in corporation tax, which was a Rishi Sunak policy, went ahead in the face of near universal opposition from business and wealth creators. The continuation of help with energy bills was there, but the reform of the energy market that many have called for was not. Tax remains at its highest in decades. In the open debate afterwards, several Tory backbenchers said, if the Conservative Party doesn't cut taxes, then what is it for? Well, Jeremy Hunt hinted that the autumn statement, the next big financial event, might just cheer them up a little bit, but he didn't go into any further detail than that, just perhaps a hint. On the Labour backbenches, however, there were calls for a wealth tax and an escalating property tax. No take as yet on the Labour front bench for either of those ideas, but they were there and they were voiced with much passion by several Labour MPs. Labour's front bench, of course, have learnt caution and not to frighten the voters. I have some great guests to mull over all of that and more, but we also, all of us, want to hear what you made of that budget, what you made of Labour's take on it, and you can email me at gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can go on to any of our social media outlets and let me know. Do get in touch. And I'm delighted to say that my first guest is Tom Clougherty. Tom is the head of tax at the Centre for Policy Studies, one of the leading think tanks. Good to see you and a very good morning to you, very good afternoon to you, sir. I didn't mention it in the introduction, but I guess the elephant in the room is the non-indexation of allowances and what people like you, the technicians and commentators, call fiscal drag. So, in fact, we will not only be paying the highest rates of tax in several decades, we will actually be paying distinctly more, which is why the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Institute of Fiscal Studies both said it's going to be a very tricky few years. Did it have to be like that?
I'm not sure that it did have to be like that.
Right, we're going to try and reconnect that link to Tom. And we have another Tom I'm delighted to welcome back to the programme, and that's Tom McPhail, who is a pensions expert and Director of Public Affairs at the financial services Lang Cat. Good to see you again. I hope you're well, and a very good afternoon to you. Can you take on that Labour charge that this is essentially just a tax cut on pensions for the rich?
I think there is some truth in that accusation. I think it's a really interesting situation we've arrived in, because the government had to solve the problem of the doctors and other high-paid employees, and particularly public sector workers, choosing to leave the workforce because they were being penalised for going to work. So that was a problem that needed fixing. The lifetime allowance was widely regarded as problematic. It was a ceiling on how much you could build up in your pension pot, and given the annual allowances, you didn't really need to have both restrictions, the annual allowance and the lifetime allowance. So they got rid of it. Great. And the way they did it, by capping off the amount of tax-free money you can have from your pension, also made a lot of sense. So there was a lot that was right about what the government did. But Labour is also right to point out that it looks like a bung to the rich. It kind of is, because this only matters to you if you're going to have £1 million or more in your pension pot. And for most people, that's not how it's going to be. So, most people will look at this and say, well, what does this do for me? This does nothing. I think the other problem we've arrived at now with this is it perhaps inadvertently, perhaps deliberately, the government has created what is in effect an inheritance tax loophole for the wealthy. It's very easy now to pour a lot of money into your pension pot for it to grow tax-free, to get tax relief on it. And when you die, it will pass on to your children largely free of tax. That's not what pensions are supposed to be for. So I have sympathy with where Labour have got to on this, but I think neither their policy response of, well, we'll just bring back the lifetime allowance, nor the government's current position is really going to hold in the long term. I think there's more work for both political sides to do on this problem.
Charles Moore writes a comment piece in the Telegraph this morning saying that it's very much an aspirational thing, rather like owning your own home. And if it's that tax efficient, then it may well be that it's something that the middle classes really seek and wish to have in their armoury as well. And two opinion polls, one for I and one for us, both say that the public haven't gone completely scatty about it. And Sir John Curtis suggests that Labour may regret their pledge to reverse it, because it may just be something that people quite like the look of and fancy a bit of themselves.
I think there's quite possibly truth in that, and I think it's interesting. Labour's eye has not been on the pensions ball these last few years. They've had other things, perhaps more important, arguably more important things to worry about. So they haven't been thinking about pensions policy. And I think as a consequence, what we had this week from them was a knee-jerk response to what looked like a bung to the wealthy. I think you can draw a parallel with 2014, 2015, when George Osborne announced the pension freedoms and drew away with a lot of the existing restrictions at the time on how people draw money from their pension pots. And the same thing happened then. Labour immediately came out of the traps and said, well, we don't like this. We'll reverse this if we get elected next year in 2015. They then saw which way the wind was blowing, realised that actually the reforms were very popular and quietly backed down on it. So I think they need to do a bit more thinking about this and work out perhaps a more coherent policy response to what the government has done.
You know better than most that far more people have the state pension rather than a private pension. And because of fiscal drag and the non-indexation of allowances, the amount you can earn before you pay any tax, state pensioners who are going to get a bit of a boost come the autumn from the triple lock are going to get a bit of a shocking wake-up call on their tax bills, aren't they?
You're absolutely right about the fiscal drag, and I think it is a very effective and efficient mechanism by which chancellors can quietly take back very substantial amounts of money from taxpayers. In the government's defence, I would also point out that the personal allowance, the threshold at which you start paying tax, has risen very considerably over the last 10 or 15 years. It's more than doubled from where it was when we go back to the Conservatives coming to power in 2010. So they have given a lot to people who have low incomes and who, in many cases, now have been taken out of the tax system altogether.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. With a state pension now of over £10,000, most pensioners are going to find themselves paying a bit more tax as the year progresses.
Tom, as I said, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed. Tom McPhail there, pensions expert. And I'm delighted that we were able to tick both the private pension box and also there at the end the state pension box too. And do look him up and go onto his website. It's excellent stuff. I'm also delighted to be told in my ear that Tom Clougherty is back now. Just before the line broke, I've suggested to you that the elephant in the room is exactly what I was just talking to the other Tom about there, and that's the non-indexation of allowances and fiscal drag. So although we're already paying the highest average tax level for decades, that means that we have the prospect, if we get a pay rise, if we get an increase in our pension, of paying even more come the autumn and come the winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you heard any of my previous answer. I was merrily chatting away to myself there for a while. But look, it's a very sneaky way of raising taxes because generally people don't notice it the way they would notice an increase in the tax rate. And this measure, freezing the allowances for income tax and national insurance, is raising vastly more money than it was meant to when Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, first announced it. Now, I think we can understand why he announced it. It's a good way to raise money, and there was a big sort of fiscal problem in the wake of the pandemic. But given how much more money it's raising than expected because inflation has been so high, you might think maybe they might have tried to moderate that a little bit, or maybe recycled some of the revenue back into making the tax system a little bit fairer in other places. So I think that is a little disappointing. But it also raises an interesting issue about the framing of these budgets. We all focus in our responses on the things the Chancellor announces on the day. And I felt pretty positive about just about everything Jeremy Hunt said. But the bad things were the corporation tax increase, which was announced 2 years ago, and that freeze in the thresholds, which was announced a little while back as well. So I suppose this is good politics to announce it this way, but it does all feed into that perception, that feeling which you highlighted in your introduction, that Britons, for the most part, are not feeling better off. They feel worse off than they did at the last election, and that's a huge political problem as well as an economic problem.
I also sense that it's a lot of Tory backbenchers, and Richard Drax, the Dorset MP, voiced it in the budget debate. I was listening to it and jotted it down. He said, if the Conservative Party doesn't cut taxes, then what is the Conservative Party for? And there were several other Tory backbenchers who came in and said that, hinting about the prospects of something that might just happen in the autumn statement. When you're that far behind in the opinion polls, is not really going to rally the troops who face losing their seats.
No, it's not. It's not. And while I have sympathy with that view, and, you do want the Conservatives to be the low tax party, goodness knows we need one in politics, I think it's a slightly too narrow view of what the Conservative Party is there for. And perhaps in September last year, we saw what could happen if you blindly pursue tax cuts without considering the surrounding economic conditions and everything. So obviously that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget has really set the tone for an awful lot of what has followed. But I also think that the government is pursuing a very particular strategy. Will it work? I'm not sure. But they've set themselves some very simple targets, some targets which are achievable, and they're going to sort of focus in quite a dull, technocratic way on achieving them. And then they can say to the public, look, unlike some of our predecessors, we set out to meet your priorities and we've met them, and trust us to keep leading the country.
Yeah, and interestingly, both the Prime Minister in PMQs and the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the budget speech made the same point, that the gainsayers, the doomsters, are wrong. This is a plan that is working. And one thing that struck me very sharply, and I said it in the introduction, is that there's no denying that the rate of inflation is falling, and falling quite sharply. Prices aren't yet, but the rate at which they're going up is definitely falling. If that is the case, then the other bit of really good news for many, many people that may be around the corner will either be a reduction in interest rates or certainly a sharp slowing in the rate at which the Bank of England puts them up. Is that the great hope, do you think, in this strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the governments and the forecasts are probably right on that front. As you said, inflation is largely controlled by the Bank of England. And unfortunately, there's quite a long lag between between the Bank of England making monetary policy decisions and those translating into lower inflation. So I think we're in that lag period at the moment. But everything suggests to me that inflation is going to come down quite significantly over the course of this year. And of course, that will ease the pinch on a lot of people. It doesn't undo the inflation that's already happened, of course. We have sort of got poorer in a one-off way because of the pandemic, because of issues in the energy market and so on. But there is perhaps a chance to turn the corner, and in the run-up to an election next year, at least paint a picture that things are starting to look a little rosier.
Well, those people listening to our conversation on radio will have missed what television viewers saw, and that is a beaming smile from the Chancellor of the Exchequer clutching his little red box outside number 11 Downing Street. So maybe you're right, and maybe he thinks he knows more than we do. But Tom, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts and analysis with us here on GB News. Tom Clougherty, who's head of tax at the Centre for Policy Studies, with his thoughts. finally, I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Campus. Sarah is a mum and a personal trainer, and if you were kind enough to be watching last weekend, you'll think, yes, I recognise her. We invited her back onto the programme. We invited her onto the programme last weekend to preview the childcare plans that everybody was talking about and that we knew were likely to come up in the budget. And as you can see, I'm delighted to say that she agreed to come back via the magic link to tell us her thoughts. As the Rolling Stones famously sang, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, you get what you need. What's your own judgment of what the Chancellor of the Exchequer was able to give on childcare?
Well, thank you for having me back, Alastair. Yes, he definitely did deliver to an extent. Obviously, the time lag is a big question, puts a very big question mark amongst lots of families. The fact that it won't be in place till 2024 to 2025, and that is a big concern, considering you've got the pressures on society and on the families right now, and the cost of living crisis is happening right now. So the fact that we've got that time lag, it's not ideal, if I can be completely honest.
Yeah. A number of people, not least in the education world, have also questioned whether or not the sector is up to meeting this new demand, and they say that what the government pays already is not really enough. So perhaps we are agreed there that it's a work in progress. Here's something that we talked about, the three of us, when you were with us last weekend. And it was voiced much more eloquently than by me by a number of Tory women members of Parliament who asked, where is the help for the mums who want to stay at home and be mums rather than go off to work, having dumped their little darlings with, albeit a totally professional and brilliant childcare operation? Do you have any sympathy with that? It's pretty profound and it's pretty fundamental stuff.
If I'm completely honest, I feel that when I say mothers, I should also say parents, because sometimes they split their leave.
Yes.
You shouldn't really have to make that choice and shouldn't have to have the pressure of making that choice. And I do know that, that nowadays parents are looking at flexibility and at salaries in equal measures when they are looking to return to work. But in terms of mothers who want to stay at home, it wasn't really covered in the budget, and once again, I feel that they're being unrecognised, which is a real shame, if I'm being completely honest.
In an ideal world, then, what would be the amendment that you would put to the finance debate that's going on around the budget? You'd want the payment to be made quicker, and you'd want more support for providers. Is that about it?
Yes, definitely. I think the time lag should definitely be brought forward. To have it as 2 years is crazy. You know, they have got the infrastructure in place. They managed to do things for COVID with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. So I definitely think that, you know, that they can make changes if they want to. They just need to make the changes now, and it will certainly help the economy and the society.
Well, interestingly, that the independent and objective Institute for Fiscal Studies agrees with you that as it sits at the moment, it will take quite some time to help anybody get back into the workforce, which, of course, was the overriding objective of it. Sarah, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah Campus, who, as I said in my introduction, is a mum and a personal trainer, with her reflections on what Jeremy Hunt did do and what he still needs to do on the key issue of childcare, which will be a big one at the general election, make no mistake. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with lots more still to come on today's programme. Train passengers are yet again facing disruption this weekend as rail workers continue to take industrial action. Plus, the Passport Office is the most recent sector to announce that it will be striking soon too. All of that to come, but first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather.
Hello there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vautry. Today has been a day of chasing rainbows for many of us in between the heavy showers that we've seen around, thanks to low pressure that is in charge across the whole of the UK. We do have frontal systems that's been pushing through Northern Ireland into areas of Scotland that's just bringing some longer spells of rain here, and it will also be breezier across the very far north of Scotland as we move throughout this evening and overnight. Elsewhere, the heavy showers that we have seen will tend to ease out and die out as we move overnight. That will allow some clear intervals to develop, just allowing temperatures to drop down a bit more. Towns and cities still generally holding up around 5-6 Celsius, but a rural frost is possible across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that could just provide some icy patches first thing on Sunday morning, particularly where we've still got a few showers lingering, but those continuing to ease out, and really Sunday is looking like a fine day for many of us, certainly throughout the morning, a good number of sunny intervals. A bit of cloud just lingering across the far east coast of England, and for Northern Ireland it's going to turn cloudier into the afternoon as this rain begins to arrive and turn damper here. But where you hold on to those sunshine throughout the afternoon, it will feel relatively pleasant and spring-like, highs of 11-12 Celsius. Southeastern areas of England will hold on to the dry weather during Sunday evening, but elsewhere the rain is then going to start spreading its way in, and as we then move into the start of the new working week, that heralds the change to some more unsettled weather. So during Monday, outbreaks of rain, a rather cloudy day for many of us, and fairly drab across the board. Some of the driest and perhaps brightest weather actually for northeastern areas of Scotland, where the rain just doesn't arrive until later on. The weather fronts are going to continue as we then move throughout the new working week, but you'll also notice that the isobars are beginning to squeeze together once again. So things will turn breezier as we head towards Wednesday. So whilst temperatures will be holding up in double digits for many of us, that will just take an edge off things. Enjoy the rest of your day.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It is just after 12:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Some breaking news just coming into us. The former US President, Donald Trump, says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. This has been indicated by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. It is over his allegations that he paid hush money to the adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016 before his election. Now, a spokesperson for the office has not commented on that. We'll bring you more as we have it. Some other breaking news. The SNP's chief executive, Peter Murrell, who's also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, has resigned with immediate effect. It follows reports he was facing the threat of a vote of no confidence following a row over the party's membership numbers. In a statement, he said, while there was no intent to mislead, he accepts that has been the outcome. The Home Secretary's in Rwanda discussing the £140 million deal to send illegal migrants to the country. Suella Braverman says the plan, which is facing criticism, will act as a powerful deterrent to those making dangerous journeys across the Channel. She visited some long-term accommodation sites, which will house both refugees and Rwandans, as well as a training and education centre. Rail travel will be severely disrupted again this weekend because of another 24-hour strike. Thousands of RMT members at 14 train operators are on picket lines for the second time in the space of 3 days. Less than 50% of train services across the country are expected to run, starting later and finishing earlier than they normally do. A new survey suggests demand for foreign holidays has recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The poll by the travel association ABTA indicates nearly two-thirds of Britain are planning a foreign holiday this year, with travel up 16% in the last 12 months. The trade group says many travel agents have seen record sales this year, holidays remaining a spending priority despite the cost of living crisis. TV online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. Once again, as you heard in Aaron's news bulletin there, train passengers are facing even more disruption across this weekend. There was disruption yesterday, and there are very few trains available at all on many of the big providers as rail workers continue with planned industrial action in pursuit of changes to work conditions and a better pay deal. More strikes are also taking place in other sectors. The PCS union, one of the biggest public sector unions, says that the passport office workers are poised to go on strike for 5 weeks, and that will inevitably extend the already long waiting time for a new passport. So ABTA may say demand is back and everybody wants to go away. Well, before you do anything else, apart from find the money to pay for it all, you might want to check the expiry date on your passport, because that's going to get a lot trickier. However, every cloud, etc., 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 the teachers' unions say they may pause new strikes ahead of talks with ministers alongside some junior doctors. However, there are several reports today suggesting that the deal that nurses and other NHS workers were offered last week isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Well, to discuss all of that, I'm delighted to be joined live in the studio by our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Before we get to those strikes, can I... It's grossly unfair because it's what breaking news is, but we just heard it in Aaron's bulletin about the resignation of the chief executive of the Scottish National Party, who also happens to be married to the former leader, Nicola Sturgeon. This is about party membership numbers, and it's cropped up in what's already a pretty fiery contest to succeed Ms Sturgeon.
Yes, the Scottish National Party at the moment seems to be almost eating itself, doesn't it? There's chaos. Kate Forbes, one of the leadership candidates, has described this as a period of extraordinary turmoil, and it certainly is. Now, this specifically revolves around an untruth, or a lie, if you like, over membership numbers. It was reported a few weeks ago that Scottish National Party membership numbers were down 30,000. That was denied. That turns out now to be the case. Now, the media chief, Murray, left on yesterday, And then today it was looking like Peter Morrell was going to be facing a vote of no confidence. He, of course, has been chief executive for 20 years, is also married to Nicola Sturgeon, and he has chosen to resign. So this is all happening in the midst of a very acrimonious leadership contest. We saw with the Conservative leadership contest last year, when all these grievances and disagreements are aired in public, it's not a good look. And the three leadership candidates are having the debates. It's becoming very fractious. There's very clear divisions, and it's not clear at all where the dust will settle with all this.
It really is one of those extraordinary days. Late last night and first thing this morning, it's all about Vladimir Putin having an arrest warrant issued against him, but with his people saying, oh, we don't even recognise this court, and we certainly don't extradite people, we don't extradite our own people, let alone the head of state. And now we get Trump's people saying that the former president expects to be arrested himself later, I think he said Tuesday.
Well, I mean, we have been hearing for a long time, haven't we, the possibility of Donald Trump being arrested for various irregularities, shall we say. So let's wait and see if this happens. It's always been a possibility, even while he was president. I mean, he was impeached, wasn't he? It didn't have any ultimate effect. So let's see what happens. But certainly,
this is very much New York versus Trump, about cooking the books and inflating the value of assets.
Well, his financial affairs have been questionable, to put it mildly, haven't they, for a long time. So let's see what happens. But it wouldn't be surprising if this did, after years of speculation about sort of dodgy dealings in his financial affairs, bear fruit. So let's see what happens.
Having changed tack as far as nurses and paramedics are concerned, do you sense that there is a willingness amongst senior government ministers, including perhaps the Transport Secretary and the Education Secretary, to do a similar thing to what Mr Barclay did in the health sector? And has the worm turned? If we're reporting now that, you know, one or two of these big power groups are now saying, no, we're not going to call any more strikes until we've had our turn around the table. Well,
certainly the government really do want to get this sorted out, because these strikes have been rumbling on now for, it feels like forever, doesn't it? But certainly the train strikes that are happening again today began last summer, and it just adds to this sense that a lot of things in Britain are broken. So the Prime Minister is very keen to get these settled and to move on. And obviously the news that inflation is going to drop to 2.9% by the end of the year will help the government in negotiations. So the government have moved, and I think the hope is now that the deal that's been offered to health workers, not the junior doctors, but that something similar could pave the way to an agreement with the teachers. So the teaching unions have suspended strikes for the foreseeable future. So have the junior doctors. The 3-day strike from the junior doctors at the beginning of the week was more disruptive, apparently, than all the other health strikes so far, because junior doctors make up like 45% of the medical professionals in the National Health Service. So a huge impact. So there is a willingness to resolve, but still
all those consultants having to move over to take up the slack.
Well, yes, and so 175,000 operations, procedures cancelled, and obviously the government have tackled the notion of doctors taking early retirement because of not worth their while to carry on with the big pension break in the budget. But the junior doctors are asking for 35%. Now, clearly the government are giving something, and they have budged on their original line that they wouldn't talk about pay for the financial year that we're currently in, and they're now giving this one-off payment. But there's no way they're going to be giving junior doctors 35%.
I think, as we've already established, and Aaron did as well in his bulletin, it's one of those days where anything can happen, so we shall watch this space. But stay with us here on GB News TV and radio and online, because I promise you faithfully, if anything does happen, Catherine will be amongst the very first to hear about it, and Aaron and I will be amongst the very first to tell you all about it. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon that we've planned. Nevertheless, what may happen that we don't know yet, including our rural spotlight this week, we're asking whether farmers and agriculture as an industry were even mentioned in the Chancellor's budget. But first, let's bring you up to date with the all-important weather.
Hello there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry. Today has been a day of chasing rainbows for many of us in between the heavy showers that we've seen around thanks to low pressure that is in charge across the whole of the UK. We do have frontal systems that's been pushing through Northern Ireland into areas of Scotland that's just bringing some longer spells of rain here, and it will also be breezier across the very far north of Scotland as we move throughout this evening and overnight. Elsewhere, the heavy showers that we have seen will tend to ease out and die out as we move overnight. That will allow some clear intervals to develop, just allowing temperatures to drop down a bit more. Towns and cities still generally holding up around 5-6 Celsius, but a rural frost is possible across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that could just provide some icy patches first thing on Sunday morning, particularly where we've still got a few showers lingering, but those continuing to ease out, and really Sunday is looking like a fine day for many of us, certainly throughout the morning, a good number of sunny intervals. A bit of cloud just lingering across the far east coast of England, and for Northern Ireland it's going to turn cloudier into the afternoon as this rain begins to arrive and turn damper here. But where you hold on to those sunshine throughout the afternoon, it will feel relatively pleasant and spring-like, highs of 11-12 Celsius. Southeastern areas of England will hold on to the dry weather during Sunday evening, but elsewhere the rain is then going to start spreading its way in, and as we then move into the start of the new working week, that heralds the change to some more unsettled weather. So during Monday, outbreaks of rain, a rather cloudy day for many of us, and fairly drab across the board. Some of the driest and perhaps brightest weather actually for northeastern areas of Scotland, where the rain just doesn't arrive until later on. The weather fronts are going to continue as we then move throughout the new working week, but you'll also notice that the isobars are beginning to squeeze together once again. So things will turn breezier as we head towards Wednesday. So whilst temperatures will be holding up in double digits for many of us, that will just take an edge off things. Enjoy the rest of your day.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. You are watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. Time now for our rural spotlight, and sticking with the budget reaction, I wanted to hear from those on the agricultural front line and ask whether they felt that farming and the agriculture industry was properly nodded towards in Jeremy Hunt's budget. We've talked many times on this programme about how important it is to restocking those shelves in supermarkets, in keeping prices down, in reducing the carbon footprint of all of the stuff that we import from abroad. In terms of the food crisis, farmers really have gone the extra mile, and they've also gone to the government with a detailed plan of what they want support to do to help us all out. Are they shouting at a deaf ear, I wonder? They're certainly crying out for government support. So what do farmers need and want from those in power? I'm delighted to welcome back Bruce Jobson, agricultural journalist and himself a farmer and a regular on the programme. I didn't spot anything specific in the budget. Did I miss something?
No, Alastair, thank you for inviting me back on. We all were sleepwalking all week, I think, with the budget. But I just want to show your viewers, for the benefit of your viewers, this publication, Farmer's Guardian, which showed Mr. Sunak saying, effectively, I would lead a pro-farming government. That was in August. Now, 12 months ago, I was on GB News, an interview with Dougie Beattie and Rachel Smeedy. And I said, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer, that he did nothing in the last budget for farming. And they've done nothing again. The whole setup of UK farming has been a disaster. We agreed to leave the EU in 2016 with a democratic vote. And since then, the government has done nothing. All it has done is cut, cut, cut. And what we're seeing now is that this year, farmers are going to be losing between 55% or up to 55% of their basic payment system. And then next year, it's going to be between 55 and 75%. And then it finishes it. At the worst time in this country's history, probably since the U-boat crisis, we're going to have farmers in a position where they perhaps are unable to plant crops because of the sheer costs involved. I just want to draw your listeners and your viewers' attention to potatoes, a very stable part of our diet. It costs roughly £3,000 an acre to plant potatoes. And a farmer, say, planting 300 acres, that's £900,000. We've had continual price increases, cost increases, I should say, by about 36%. Then we've had about 11 or 12 increases in interest rates. All this is putting costs on the farmers. Now, we used to grow 150,000 hectares just even at the turn of this century. We're now down to 100,000. Next year, there's going to be even less. So we're not going to see a reduction in food inflation. And hard-pressed families, never mind the farmers, the hard-pressed families in this country are going to suffer for continued food inflation through the supermarkets, and the consumers are going to have to carry that cost through them.
Absolutely. Bruce, let me put a blunt question to you, and a very simple one. Are ministers, right up to Secretary of State for Environment and including the Farms Minister, disagreeing with that 10-point plan or just ignoring it?
I think they've continued to ignore it. I can't see what they're doing. They've known about this. The EU, straight away, when the invasion happened, they scrapped their policy they said, right, we're going to pass on money, we're going to keep maintaining growing crops, etc. This government did absolutely nothing. Mr. Sunak was in charge he was the Chancellor. We've had a whole lot of disastrous people who've been Minister of Agriculture. I shouldn't say that, it's DEFRA. That's another problem we've had. We no longer have anyone in charge of food production agriculture. We've cut back gradually from 80% self-sufficiency to 58% in roughly 2010 when I wrote an article.
Yeah.
And we're probably down to 55% or below. Compare that to the US, Alastair, using USDA, United States Department of Agriculture figures. The US has increased output by nearly 300%. This has been an absolute disastrous ideological policy which has been there for 30, 40 years.
Bruce?
It's been passed on. We're heading nowhere. I used the word Farmageddon in a recent article that I've been writing about. Farmageddon. And, you know, as I say, my heart is in farming, but my heart is also with the consumers who are being squeezed with interest rates, mortgages.
Bruce, that's
everything.
been very much our agenda here as well on our Rural Spotlight, and great to see you again. Fingers crossed they will listen, and when they do, you come back and we'll chat about it again. That's Bruce Jobson there, who's a farmer himself, but also an agriculture journalist, and always well worth following. Now, as we have been discussing, the Chancellor's budget announced many changes, but one thing stayed the same, and that was the energy subsidies to help with energy bills. So what is available to you and me and Bruce and farmers and everybody else, and what is remaining there on the table to help with the cost of living crisis? I'm delighted to be joined now to go through that with Angela Knight, who is the former CEO of Energy UK. Did it surprise you that at a time of tight economics for the government, that Sunak and Hunt found a not insignificant amount of money to keep this thing going?
No, didn't surprise me at all. It had been hugely well trailed, and I think that the sort of political push behind keeping the energy price guarantee, as they call it, at £2,500 a year for the average household, which way you wish to calculate it, was so heavily trailed, had such a lot of push behind it, that I expected it to be, to the announcement to be as it is. Perhaps, though, the most important thing about energy is not so much that cap, that guarantee, because if you look at what is happening in the wholesale markets, the likelihood for all of us in 2023 is, however that calculation is put in place, we're going to be paying less for energy than that cap. And that is because overall, the wholesale price of gas and electricity has indeed come down. And it's more likely that we'll be paying about 2,100, 2,200 as the cap, rather than this 2,500. What I'm really saying is this is an interim measure for a very short period of time, because the whole situation, as far as energy price is concerned, is radically changing than it was 6 months or a bit longer ago.
Sure. Can I just interject a similar thought to that, which I was going to ask you anyway, and that is when you and I have talked about this before, and other people who have specialised in the energy field, there seems to be a consensus that somebody needs to fundamentally review the market and how it functions, and what sets the price and how renewables factor in and what have you. Not a word of that. That surely, Angela, is an open goal.
Yes, but I think actually work on that is taking place. It's pretty tough going, I have to say. And it's not energy, it's electricity. I don't mean to pick you up, but we tend to use the word energy and put a whole load of stuff in under there. So the question is the electricity wholesale market, which is some form of an average of the cost, or should be some form of an average of the cost of producing electricity via coal when we use it, gas, which we use a lot, wind, which we're increasingly using a lot, our old nuclear and solar and so on. But in fact, what happens is every half hour, the wholesale price is set off what was the highest price producer of electricity. And that at the moment is gas. And that's why we've got a whole chunk of the wind generators and the nuclear generators where the government said, aha, come on, you've got to pay more of your profits in tax because you've had artificial elevation in your price. Okay for the short term, but for the medium and long term, we need to sort out that calculation, so bring down the cost of electricity to all of us. But I do know that that algorithm, as they call it, is pretty complex. And like everything, it's a bit like a fruit machine. You alter one bit. Instead of getting the 3 pears you intended, you get 1 banana, 2 oranges, a cherry or whatever. So they have to be careful with doing it. But I think it's absolutely essential to do it, because where we are today is a very different situation to when that algorithm was set. It's deep breath, put the physicists, put the engineers, put the mathematicians, put the brains on it, come out, accept that some people are not going to like it, but it's a better proposition for the UK generally.
Angela, eloquently put as always, and I'm glad that work in progress. Thank you very much indeed, Angela Knight, there, former CEO of Energy UK. And you are watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with lots more still to come on the programme this afternoon. We'll have more on the budget, but what do the political parties think of it? We'll have all of that and more, plus some of your thoughts, so keep them coming in. But first, a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
As I was attempting to say, we are into the last hour of the programme, keeping you company here on TV and radio with lots still to come, including more on the Chancellor's budget this week. Lots to discuss, but what do the parties really think of it? And did the earth move for any of them? Plus, the charity Guide Dogs launches a new campaign. We'll have the very latest, but first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news, and it's a cracker. Here's Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon to you. It is just past 1 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary's in Rwanda discussing the £140 million deal to send illegal migrants to the country. Suella Braverman says the plan, which is facing criticism, will act as a powerful deterrent for those making dangerous journeys across the Channel. She visited long-term accommodation sites, which will house both refugees and Rwandans, as well as a training and education centre where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday and has called on his supporters to protest and take our nation back. The Manhattan's District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former US president over an alleged hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. It was in the run-up to the 2016 election. And Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, claims she had an affair with Trump a decade earlier. He denies the affair happened. The twice impeached former president has criticised the attorney's office for being corrupt and political. The SNP's chief executive has resigned with immediate effect. It follows reports that Peter Morrell, who's also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was facing the threat of a vote of no confidence following a row over the party's membership numbers. In a statement, he said while there was no intent to mislead, he accepts that has been the outcome. Rail passengers are facing another day of strike action and disruption. Thousands of RMT members at 14 train operators are on picket lines across the country, the second 24-hour strike in the space of 3 days. Passengers are being told to expect disruption, with services starting later and finishing earlier than usual. General Secretary of the RMT, Mick Lynch, says transport ministers need to follow the lead of other government departments.
We need a change. We need the government to make a change in attitude. There's a bit of that this week we've seen in the health service and maybe in the teachers' unions. The difference in those deals is that there are no conditions. It's new money, but our members are having to swallow, or expected to swallow, vast changes to their working conditions, and they're not prepared to do that in order to get a very modest, poor pay rise.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is due to appear in court later on charges of corruption. Police stormed his residence in Lahore this morning and arrested several of his supporters. Khan's appearance in court follows days of standoffs outside his property, with police attempting to arrest him on Tuesday. The RAC says diesel drivers are not saving money with the fuel duty freeze, despite retailers making more profit. It says major fuel retailers are not reducing the prices. They're not passing on those savings, despite fuel rates they pay falling to a 15-month low. The company found retailers are taking an average profit margin of 19 pence for every litre they sell, compared with 9 pence last year. A new survey suggests demand for foreign holidays has recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The poll by the travel association ABTA indicates nearly 2/3 of Britons are planning a foreign holiday this year, with 37% having already booked. The trade group says many travel agents have seen record sales this year, with holidays remaining a spending priority despite the cost of living crisis. Travel correspondent Simon Calder told us it's great news for the industry.
yes, demand is back to pre-pandemic levels, that actually 62% of us have had a holiday in the past year abroad, and that number is set to increase. So very good news for the travel industry, arguably very good news for the traveller who is desperate to make up for lost sunshine. But unfortunately, of course, as you say, the cloud on the horizon is the passport strike.
And we'll have more throughout the afternoon here on GB News, but now it is back to Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thanks very much indeed. Now, we've been discussing today in some detail the Chancellor's budget. Jeremy Hunt set out his plan for seeking growth, reducing borrowing, and told us all how he was going to do it. He also announced his grand plans to help working parents with childcare, how he was going to make sure that people could stay and work longer, and said that would help remain in place for... He also kept help in place for energy bills and taking on, as it were, that dimension of the cost of living. However, many said that this was a budget to help the rich and did not get to the core principle of a Conservative government, which is to cut taxes. That was commentators said that, but also a number of Conservative backbenchers, both on the floor of the House and also in the subsequent meeting of Tory MPs. Labour were quick on the attack and said straight away that they would scrap the new pension reform package laid out by Jeremy Hunt, which they said was just a multi-billion-pound bung to his rich buddies if they were to win the next general election. Many also said that the childcare plan was the best in decades, but why should we be waiting for it? You heard that from one of my guests herself, who lobbied for it and argued for it a little earlier on. So, how we have quickly come to the battleground for the next general election on many of these issues. Joining me first this hour is political commentator and friend of mine, Benedict Spence, who I'm going to chew over that. Very interesting polling reaction in the Independent newspaper, but also our own People's poll, that suggests that despite all of that, and all of those billions of pounds on childcare and pensions and the rest of it, Labour remain very clearly ahead in the voters' preference come the general election, but Sunak remains quite clearly ahead of Starmer.
Yeah.
Very little progress for Starmer at all.
Yeah, I think that this was... it was a curious budget in that it almost felt like the early rounds between a heavyweight boxing match. Both sides sort of slightly just trying to work each other out, not wanting to go, too bold. There wasn't a major rabbit out of the hat as, there is sometimes. And actually, Labour's response was, I thought, relatively muted, given what, it could have been. I thought that it was an accurate appraisal, saying that it's a sticking plaster whilst you're waiting in the waiting room and actually you need major surgery. That's true, but I don't think it takes a genius to work that out. And I think the problem is the Tories don't want to be too bold at this point, because being bold very recently has had some pretty catastrophic effects for them. They don't want to be seen as potentially reckless. They don't want to start a fight that they feel that they can't win, as they've sort of risked with a few of the unions, and it's not gone too badly for them, but you don't want to sort of invite more of that on. I think at this moment in time, you're right. Rishi Sunak is polling relatively well, and you've kind of got to use that as an asset. There's been this idea that only Boris could have the gravitas and the popularity to take on Labour and win. Well, that's clearly not true, and actually what is the issue here is the rest of the party. And I think this is as much about getting the rest of the party in line, disciplined, and saying to them, look, we don't have long here. You've kind of got to persuade the rest of the public that we're sensible. So if you want to be low tax and you want to be shouting about, culture war issues, well, you can do that, fine. But just be aware it's not going down particularly well. Sure. It's not what people want.
Just while you were giving that answer, we're running some picture of Keir Starmer responding to the budget speech, and Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, sitting next to him there. I've said this several times before on the programme, but I don't think you and I have discussed it before. Some of Starmer's lieutenants are outshining him, clearly. Yeah. Bridget Phillipson on childcare, on education, on early years. Yeah. Reeves, I would argue, on the economy, and Streeting on health.
Well, Streeting, certainly. In many ways, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think when Keir Starmer came in, it was with the idea of him not being a huge character who was going to rock the boat. It was about detoxifying the party. Bringing other characters to the fore, it reduces the likelihood of dissent in the ranks early on. That has been a problem that Labour have had for a very long time. And it gives the impression that Labour is more than just Keir Starmer, that there are other minds on the backbenches, that you're not just voting for one guy, as clearly people feel with the Tory party. You're just voting for Sunak and maybe Hunt to a degree, but actually that's the deal. What Labour are trying to push is the idea that it is a government rather than a prime minister that you're going for. There is still the tendency every now and then to let the mask slip, the sort of the student politic-y aspect of it. And Angela Rayner, people like that, can be very useful, but equally can go off at a bit of a tangent. But I think it is, up to now, the sort of the slow, steady, let's not do anything too rash approach has enabled Labour to sort of tread water whilst the Tories have gone up and then down and then tried to get themselves back up. And this is the thing. Right now, Labour isn't saying anything that's especially bold, and they feel that they don't need to, as long as they just appear sensible, which is
and loyalty and unity are crucial.
Yeah, those are
which
really
takes me to my
important
next question, which is the problems that the Prime Minister may have, even if the polls suggest that he's more popular than Sir Keir Starmer, and that is the threat of a rebellion over the Windsor framework, the replacement to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and real elegant disquiet with some elements of the childcare voiced by a number of MPs, particularly Tory women, saying, hang on a minute, where's the support for the family? Where's the support for women who just want to stay at home and look after their little ones, or husbands who want to stay at home and look after their little ones? And if the Tories don't cut taxes, what are they for, said Richard Drax.
Right now, I think what those Tory MPs have to recognise is they had the Hail Mary election a few years ago under Boris Johnson in which they could have pursued those policies, and they fumbled it really badly. They no longer have the liberty, I think, of being able to go quite as far to the right as they would like, because they need to appeal much more to the centre ground to say to them, look, we're not, you can trust us, please do stick with us. Because right now, I don't rule out the possibility that Rishi Sunak can claw things back and win, but it will be a very slim majority if he does. And that's the thing. When you had a 60-seat majority and 5 years ahead of you, yeah, go nuts, you can do that kind of thing. When you've got a matter of 18 months, maybe, at best, and you've got Labour with that kind of a poll lead, you can't afford, actually, to be throwing up policies that, if we're being completely honest, are not necessarily popular in the swing seats that you need to win. They're very good with the grassroots, with those sort of Tory heartlands, but those people are going to vote for you anyway at this point. They're not going to vote for Reform or Claim or any of those. Let's get that out of the window for now. That's the big picture. It is the red wall. It is the people who are very much occupied the centre, who just don't particularly like Labour but look at them as being slightly more credible than the Tories. Those are the people you've got to say, look, we're not rabid Conservatives. We're not sort of rabid Thatcherites. We're sensible. We appeal to a broad church, and this is why you should stick with us.
If Hunt teasing, talking about those rebel Tory MPs may like to just pause a while and wait for the autumn statement, there may be something there, the public finances are in a slightly better state. Let me put that to you, plus a point I made earlier on, and that is that there's no denying that the rate of inflation is falling, and falling quite sharply. If that drags interest rates down or stops them going up quite so quickly, as is threatened in Europe and as is threatened in the United States of America, slam dunk.
Then I think they can afford to be a little more bold, a little more creative, because then we really will be sort of, I think, into the election cycle. We'll be approaching that. I think this is still a little bit too early to say this is the battle lines being drawn. But if we get to that point and things have improved, then they might feel ambitious enough to come up with something that perhaps isn't directly on the agenda, or that is a bit of a risk to try to get themselves over the line. Because at that point, they'll be thinking, well, this is the moment. This is do or die. Sure. And Labour, up to this point, has consistently been very measured, very balanced, but it's not very incisive. It's not very sort of particularly inspiring. It is very much a case of being able to...
A crucial point, and that's why I said in my overall introduction before you were kind enough to join us, that you had not the usual suspects, but a couple of fresh faces saying, let's have a progressive property tax and let's have a wealth tax, not immediately embraced by Sir Keir or any other member of the front bench, although there are one or two there who would say, yeah, we'll have some of that.
Yeah, I think it's, again, this is the difficulty, is that is the cohort of people that is most likely to vote, and that isn't one that you necessarily want to alienate. But I think, broadly speaking, we're getting to a point now where you see certain services beginning to not function as they should, the NHS, the police, the criminal justice system, and as it begins to impact the middle classes more and more, I think you'll get a lot more sympathy from people who are prepared to say, OK, I'm prepared to let a little bit more go in return for these things coming back. It needs to hit those middle classes first before you can go to them with the collection tin, Frank.
Good to see you again, Benedict. Thank you very much indeed, Benedict Spencer. And I'm delighted now to be joined by a Conservative Member of Parliament. He's the MP for North East Bedfordshire, Richard Phillips, who's also former Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Richard, good to see you, sir, and a very good afternoon to you.
Hello.
Do you understand how this budget was supposed to help with growth and help the business sector particularly make the OECD look daft in saying we are going to be the only economy globally that's contracting in the next 12 months?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned forecast, because in many ways this was a budget of contrasting forecasts more than anything else, comparing the OBR's projections last November with now gave the Chancellor substantial headroom. And he's done that in very targeted ways. You know, I think as your discussion was just saying, there's not one big blunderbuss action here by the Chancellor, other than the quite interesting changes on childcare, but a lot of things that are supposed to be supply-side reforms to get people back to work. And that's really the grain of trying to prove the OECD wrong.
A couple of your colleagues, and I've mentioned him several times now, Richard Drack said, if your party does not exist to cut taxes, then what's it for? And George Eustice, the former Environment Secretary, said, where is the help for the family? Where is the help for those parents who want to stay at home and look after their children rather than get out there and be a two-job family?
Yeah, look, Richard Drack is a good friend of mine. I think his views on the economy are generally right. I think the problem with George Eustace's challenge on childcare is that there's a large number of working people for whom tax changes won't have anything like the effect than the proposals the Chancellor is putting forward will have. And I think to that extent, what the Chancellor is proposing is probably better targeted to solve the problem that he's identified, which is getting more people back into work. And that's a good thing, because as we look to the next election, the Conservatives want to be able to demonstrate that we are not only on the side of working people, but that work pays. And part of that is ensuring that wage rates goes up and household finances go up. And these changes on childcare can help.
Richard Fuller, music to my ears. I've tried to explain that to so many people so many times. It's lovely to hear it from someone like you say it. The best way to get people to go back to work or to stay in work is to let them keep as much of what they earn as possible. Were you convinced by the hints that the autumn statement may be a little more rosy than the last budget just a few days back?
Well, I'm hopeful. I mean, if you've just seen such a big change in OBR forecasts in such a short period of time, you don't want to put too much out there ahead of the next OBR forecast. And sadly, we jump around these forecasts perhaps a little bit too much. But I do think the Chancellor should look at simplifying our taxes. And, you know, it's heartening that Labour's response has been pretty hollow, other than their usual class warfare, because most of the British public understand that, you know, people who earn a lot of money, if you want to get a doctor back to work, you've got to do something so they don't feel they're overly penalised with double and sometimes triple taxation when they do that. And we want to get away from that. And I hope when the Chancellor comes to the autumn statement, if there is space available, he'll do something about those tax thresholds, both
absolutely.
At the low end, but also at the, don't forget, the middle class families now. That 40% tax rate is supposed to be for very high tax, very high income earners, but it's kicking in at a low rate, and every year in real terms that gets lower and lower.
Richard Fuller, on corporation tax, should Jeremy Hunt have told his neighbour, the Prime Minister, sorry, boss, on that one, you're wrong. We shouldn't raise the tax level facing British business?
Well, he'd be a brave man to do that, because obviously the Prime Minister brought it in and had done a lot of homework. And so I think the Chancellor would have had to have a look at that homework in a lot of detail. Look, I mean, there's a fundamental point here, which is a matter of judgment. I think for myself and some of my Conservative colleagues, we think that the 25%, the increased 25%, takes away an advantage, which is that the headline rate is what a lot of companies look at when they look to make their global investments, the big multinationals. And it's only after you get over that hurdle that you can then say, well, look, here's break in year 2, year 3, year 4. And I do worry that after 20 or 30 years under Conservative and Labour governments have demonstrated to the world that the UK consistently reduces corporation tax, we've now done such a sharp reversal.
Or more will follow AstraZeneca and go and set up their tent somewhere else. Richard Fuller, great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us. Richard Fuller there, Member of Parliament, Conservative Member of Parliament, and former Treasury Minister himself. We believe passionately in balance on this programme, so I'm particularly delighted to be joined by my next guest, and welcome back to the programme Stephen Timms, who is Labour Member of Parliament for East Ham and Chair of the Work and Pensions Committee in the House of Commons. I was watching the budget debate with great interest, and it slightly amused me that the first thing you said was, "I'm sorry, I'm slightly late," and I missed some of the exchanges. What was your overall reaction as a senior backbench Member of Parliament and chair of that select committee to Labour's response to this full budget?
Well, I welcomed what Rachel Reeves said in response. I mean, you made the point earlier that Rachel's doing a really excellent job as Shadow Chancellor, and I agree with that, and I very much hope that it won't be too long before she's Chancellor of the Exchequer. It was a clear analysis of the problems that the country is in, the economic problems we're facing, the lack of investment, the lack of growth, and a commitment to a kind of long-term plan under a Labour government to address the problems. I thought she made a very good response. I think she's right as well to pick on this tax giveaway for the richest 1% of pension savers, which was the one kind of really surprising element in the budget. And I'm kind of baffled, really, why that's been done. I mean, I understand there's a problem with doctors. That's been evident for a while. The government seemed to say, well, to solve it quickly, all we could do was give out £1.2 billion in tax relief. But, I mean, of course, they should have fixed this problem, looked at the problem some time ago, not suddenly tried now to come up. But you know, £1.2 billion at a time when, as Richard Fuller was saying, more and more people are being dragged into higher rate tax. It's wrong, you know, and I think really it reflects the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer spends far too much time talking to people who are in that 1% group and kind of gets out of touch with what ordinary people are having to put up with at the moment.
You went in hard on the effort to include some of the long-term sick and indeed disabled as targets to try and tempt them back into work and make it easier for them to get back into work. And it seemed to me that you won an agreement from the Treasury benches, from the government benches, in the sense that help needs to be available to those people who do want to work. And we all know perfectly well that there are many out there, long-term sick and disabled, who really are very, very keen to get back into work. It is what they want to do.
They are very keen, and I welcome a number of the ideas in the Disability White Paper that was published on Budget Day. I mean, the problem there, which I drew attention to in my speech, is that we just don't have the details. We don't really know what it is the government is proposing. They've said they're going to scrap the work capability assessment. I don't think anyone is going to mourn the loss of that. But what we don't know is what they're going to put in its place. There's clearly, looking at what they have said, there's clearly something is going to go in place of the work capability assessment. They're going to legislate for it apparently next year in 2024, but we've no idea what it is. So I think we do need those details. I mean, other things which are welcome with the childcare support. I very much welcome the changes there. As you mentioned, I chair the Work and Pensions Select Committee, cross-party committee with a Conservative majority. We called for changes to the way childcare support is paid for people who claim universal credit. I was very pleased that the Chancellor accepted both of our key recommendations on that in his budget statement this week. And I pay tribute to my colleague on the committee, Siobhan Bailey, Conservative member, who he referred to in his speech, who I think has been working very hard behind the scenes to lobby for the changes that we were proposing. So, you know, there were helpful changes there. For disabled people, I think there is a good deal more to be done before we've got a package which can do the job that's needed. But there's certainly some important potential there.
And there's never any harm in Labour and Conservative working together if it is in the right objective and the right ends. Stephen, thank you again for breaking into your weekend to come and talk to us here on GB News. It genuinely is always a pleasure to talk to you. Stephen Timms there, Labour Member of Parliament, and as I said and as he said, the chair of the Work and Pensions Committee. So look forward to having him back on the programme. Always welcome anytime. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair, Stewart and Friends after the break. Suella Braverman is visiting Rwanda. You heard that in our news bulletin earlier, to reaffirm her commitment to the UK's controversial deportation policy. Our Home and Security editor is there and will be able to give us the very latest. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather here.
Hello there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry. Today has been a day of chasing rainbows for many of us in between the heavy showers that we've seen around, thanks to low pressure that is in charge across the whole of the UK. We do have frontal systems that's been pushing through Northern Ireland into areas of Scotland that's just bringing some longer spells of rain here, and it will also be breezier across the very far north of Scotland as we move throughout this evening and overnight. Elsewhere, the heavy showers that we have seen will tend to ease out and die out as we move overnight. That will allow some clear intervals to develop, just allowing temperatures to drop down a bit more. Towns and cities is still generally holding up around 5-6 Celsius, but auroral frost is possible across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that could just provide some icy patches first thing on Sunday morning, particularly where we've still got a few showers lingering, but those continuing to ease out, and really Sunday is looking like a fine day for many of us, certainly throughout the morning, a good number of sunny intervals. A bit of cloud just lingering across the far east coast of England, and for Northern Ireland it's going to turn cloudier into the afternoon as this rain begins to arrive and turn damper here. But where you hold on to those sunshine throughout the afternoon, it will feel relatively pleasant and spring-like, highs of 11-12 Celsius. Southeastern areas of England will hold on to the dry weather during Sunday evening, but elsewhere the rain is then going to start spreading its way in, and as we then move into the start of the new working week, that heralds the change to some more unsettled weather. So during Monday, outbreaks of rain, a rather cloudy day for many of us, and fairly drab across the board. Some of the driest and perhaps brightest weather actually for northeastern areas of Scotland, where the rain just doesn't arrive until later on. The weather fronts are going to continue as we then move throughout the new working week, but you'll also notice that the isobars are beginning to squeeze together once again. So things will turn breezier as we head towards Wednesday. So whilst temperatures will be holding up in double digits for many of us, that will just take an edge off things. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. It is just gone 1:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Let's bring you up to date with the headlines. The Home Secretary is in Rwanda discussing the £140 million deal to send illegal migrants to the country. Suella Braverman says the plan, which has been criticised, will act as a powerful deterrent for those making dangerous journeys across the Channel. She visited long-term accommodation sites, which will house both refugees and Rwandans, as well as a training and education centre, where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday and has called on his supporters to protest and take our nation back. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former president over an alleged hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. It was in the run-up to the 2016 election. Daniels says she has had an affair with Trump a decade earlier, which he denies. The twice-impeached former president, though, has criticised the attorney's office for being corrupt and political. The SNP's chief executive has resigned with immediate effect. It follows reports that Peter Murrell, who's also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was facing the threat of a vote of no confidence following a row over the party's membership numbers. In a statement, he said while there was no intent to mislead, he accepts that has been the outcome. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, as you just heard in Aaron's news bulletin, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is visiting Rwanda this weekend to reaffirm her commitment to the UK's controversial deportation policy. It's the Home Secretary's first visit to the African nation with her predecessor, Priti Patel, where her predecessor, Priti Patel, signed the agreement in April last year in a bid to deter illegal small boat crossings. Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is in Rwanda and has an update on the latest developments there and what progress the Home Secretary is making.
The Home Secretary's arrival here in Kigali is a very public reaffirmation of the UK and the Rwandan government's determination to push ahead with the deal to send asylum seekers here. The plan is, of course, still stuck in the British courts. And there's no doubt the government here in Rwanda has been stung in recent months by the level of criticism it's received from human rights groups and refugee charities. Suella Braverman and her counterparts here insist that's a willful misrepresentation of what the country has to offer. It has already accepted asylum seekers and other immigrants from countries in Africa and the Middle East, who the government here in Kigali say are making good lives for themselves. Indeed, growing levels of immigration are a key part of Rwanda's economic growth plan, which includes a burgeoning tech sector. The government here is prepared, they say, to take many thousands of asylum seekers if required. But of course, any move in that direction will mean many millions more of UK taxpayers' money being channeled into the economy here. More accommodation, we're told, is in the pipeline. Asylum seekers will, the UK government asserts, have access to all the legal and other support services they'll need. But even the Rwanda plan's most ardent supporters acknowledge there are compromises. This isn't yet a fully developed economy. But as far as the UK government is concerned, it is a vital component to their migration plan. Without a third country willing to take asylum seekers, that plan is almost certain to fail. Mark White with the Home Secretary in the Rwandan capital, Kigali.
And we will have more from Mark as the visit progresses on GB News TV and radio throughout the day and across the weekend. Now, today marks 20 years since Parliament voted in favour of sending British troops to war in Iraq. Tony Blair's government drafted a motion, and I quote, to use all means necessary to ensure the disarmament of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, despite a quarter of Labour MPs voting against the war. It passed instead with support from the Conservative opposition. The invasion began just days after, and it lasted well into the next decade, with consequences that are still very raw for the international community and indeed many members of the Labour Party, and you may argue, more significantly for veterans who served in that conflict. Well, our reporter Will Hollis has more and reflects upon those extraordinary events.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
2003 will be known for little else in modern memory other than the start of the Iraq War. A coalition led by the United States, bolstered through British support, today marks 20 years since Parliament voted in favour of the invasion. With Tony Blair as Prime Minister, the decision was made against a backdrop of mass public protest. One big question guiding the turmoil: was the invasion legal? Major General Chip Chapman is a former senior British military commander to US Central Command.
The war had been underpinned by UNSCR 1441, which was diplomacy had run its day, and that Saddam Hussein had to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction. Of course, that was the impetus to war, and the problem became that there were no weapons of mass destruction. So I don't think people really believed that. A lot of people didn't believe it because that led to the million-person march in London. So there was a lot of fracture, and certainly from the top of defence, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the future Lord Boyce, did want to get clarification from the Attorney General that any intervention by the British Armed Forces was indeed legal, and he got that assurance.
The weapons were never found, and despite quickly toppling Saddam Hussein, the war evolved. British troops spent many years fighting an insurgency. It's one of the reasons why some Iraq veterans suffer with post-traumatic stress. Around 9% of Iraq veterans have PTSD. Anniversaries can act as a trigger, even many years later, according to the mental health charity Combat Stress. Dr. Felix Davies is Director of Operations.
We are still finding that we are having veterans of Iraq come forward to us for help at this time. And they're experiencing a range of mental health problems. Often people think about post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, but we also find veterans come forward with mental health needs around anxiety, depression.
The war ended in 2011, yet the consequences of the decision to go into Iraq burned through the last decade and continue to this day. Will Hollis, GB News.
Extraordinary events, I remember them so clearly. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with more still to come on the programme this afternoon in our reflections, particularly upon Jeremy Hunt's budget and what it means for business. I'd be delighted to welcome back my good friend Karen Billimoria, who is Vice President of the Confederation of British Industry, for his thoughts. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends. Stay with us here on TV and on radio and online.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome back. As I said just before that break, we continue our discussion, our reflections on Jeremy Hunt's budget just a few days ago, particularly the childcare element, the pensions element, and now I'm delighted to say the corporation tax element. And Lord Karen Billimoria, who founded Cobra Beer and is also Vice President of the Confederation of British Industry, and there he is in all his glory. Karen, I said a little earlier that Jeremy Hunt should have taken a deep breath and said to his neighbour, sorry, boss, but on increasing corporation tax, if we're going for growth, you're just wrong.
This is the worst thing that could have happened, increasing corporation tax now. From 19% to 25%, almost 1/3 in one swoop. This is the first increase in corporation tax we've had in decades. And when George Osborne reduced corporation tax down to 20%, then 19%, was going to go down to 17%. He actually had an ambition to take it down to 15%. In fact, the Chancellor, current Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, wanted corporation tax to be as low as 15%. Instead, what do? We do exactly the opposite. And the record has shown when the corporation tax was reduced, our tax take actually went up. So to try and get this £18 billion extra per year, which is what it ended up being by increasing corporation tax from 19 to 25, is so short-sighted. It is literally killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Because what you're doing is you're hampering the growth, you're hampering our recovery from the worst crisis in the Second World War, and what's really important is you're hampering inward investment from abroad. Having a high rate of corporation tax sends out a bad signal. We've seen that with AstraZeneca deciding to invest in Ireland next door, 12.5%, half our rate now. And the Chancellor, Prime Minister say, oh, we've got the lowest corporation tax headline rate compared with the rest of the G7. Well, what about the OECD? We're now above the OECD average. We need to be competitive because as an economy, we have not done well. If you look at it since the financial crisis, our average UK household income, just look at the Financial Times today, it's actually stagnated for 15 years. If you look at our growth in the UK in real wages, it's been, if you look at the whole list of countries, with Lithuania at the top of the list, Latvia and Estonia, Poland, we're right down, UK way, way, way down the list. I'm sorry, we shouldn't be there. We need to grow this economy. We need to be bolder. We had a shock last September with the irrational exuberance of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. With their best of intentions, they went about it the wrong way. The OBR, and I said this in my speech on the budget in the House of Lords on Thursday, I said, what's the bet? If Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng had taken the trouble and care to have the OBR prepare a report to back up their plans, the debt to GDP, which is going to be almost 100% 5 years from now, would not be that much higher than Jeremy Hunt's plan. But they didn't do that. So we are now stuck in a situation where we've got taxes going up when we should be putting taxes down. And we've got an economy really struggling, businesses struggling, citizens struggling. And please don't get me wrong. There's some good things in the budget as well. The replacement of the super deduction, which I was worried would be taken away with increasing corporation tax, a double whammy. That has not happened, in that they have, as Rishi Sunak promised me one-to-one, they put in a 100% tax relief for investment in plant and machinery and technology, and I'm grateful for that.
I was going to say that was the briefing that the Treasury people put out almost the moment Jeremy sat down, was to say that actually a lot of people won't have to pay this tax because if they do the right thing and invest and put in new machinery and improve productivity, they won't be paying a penny piece extra in tax. But what you were saying earlier that I want to underline for the people who are kind enough to listen to and watch our conversation is that for multinational companies like AstraZeneca, who chose not to come to the UK but went to Ireland instead, they do literally sit down and say, look, if we set up shop in France, it's going to cost us X. If we set up shop in Holland, it's going to cost us Y. And on that basis, amongst many other things, they come to a judgment. That is why you, let me be absolutely crystal clear, are saying that this Tory government has shot itself in the foot in terms of international competitiveness.
Without a doubt, this is a very, very bad move. And to try and say we're trying to be fiscally prudent, well, you've stabilized things since September when we had that shock when the market did not accept Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's plans. And we got out of that, and to the credit of Rishi Sunak and to Jeremy Hunt, they have stabilized things. There's not long to go before the next election. Now they need to grow the economy. They've got to show that they can grow the economy. Instead, you've got personal allowances that are frozen until 2028 with inflation that has touched 10%. That's a huge tax increase. It's up to more than £500 per individual. That's right there. So the tax increase is not just corporation tax. Individuals are also having their taxes increased. And the government's doing its best to help with energy support for individuals, which has been extended. There's been energy support for businesses. Then the childcare, what a good initiative. But when is it coming in? It's not starting until next year. Then it's being phased in. Then eventually it'll come in 2025. The same thing with the lifelong learning account. We desperately need to have lifelong skilling because people in jobs today will have to reskill within 10 years. 90% of the workforce has to be retrained. Businesses have to invest £130 billion more. But if you have this lifelong learning account, which is a great thing, announced a long time ago, by the way, not this budget, more than a year ago it was announced. When is it starting? 2024. Why not start now? So this,
do you think that
there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency?
Yeah, the 11 billion or so spent on the pension reforms, was that a little bit of unfocused exuberance, and you've just given a compelling list of things that you would rather have got done and got done sooner? Do you think the pensions reforms was a misjudgment?
That was targeted very specifically at people like senior doctors and consultants and surgeons, where there was a complete disincentive to carry on working because the tax was so punitive. And this limit, by the way, was brought down from 1.8% to 1 million by George Osborne over a decade ago. And now we need to make sure that those people who are crucial to our health service, which has been under so much pressure, which is still under pressure, needs a huge amount, not only of investment, but there's a lot of reform that's needed for our National Health Service. And if you, on top of that, have crucial individuals who are retiring when they shouldn't be, and you're doing something to incentivize them to do that, well, that should be done. And that's what why the government has done this. But it's been spun in a way that, oh, this is helping the richest, but it's helping some very key individuals who need that help to stay in the workforce.
Sure. Karen, great to talk to you always. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your weekend to share your thoughts and reflections upon that budget. And you could not have been clearer about corporation tax. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Now, total change of tack. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the budget, I'm delighted to say, but it matters to me passionately, and I know it will matter to many of you. We, as a family, love our dogs. We have 2 at home. In fact, I think actually today we've probably got 3 because I think my daughter's visiting and will have bought her dog. One of them is a rescue dog, and my daughter's dog is also a rescue dog. My wife is also a supporter of guide dogs. Dogs, which is a superb charity. And it not only helps them do great stuff for other folk, but also they keep you up to date with what your particular puppy is doing, which is absolutely superb. Everybody knows the basic what guide dogs do, because we see them about the whole time, which is terrific. But they've launched a brand new short film that showcases the, quotes, My Life Skills service that can help young people, particularly with visual impairments, live the full lives that they choose. The charity hopes that the campaign will highlight the unique and diverse needs of those with sight loss. And Guide Dogs is currently working with over 1,000 young people, offering support in everything from kitchen and personal care skills. I mean, I guess I'm going to be talking to Josh in a moment. Josh is... there he is. Is somebody who has taken part in this promotional campaign, and it means the world to him, I can tell you. I'll be talking to him in just a moment. Sitting with me here in the studio, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Folds, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Guide Dogs. Hello.
Hi, thanks.
And welcome to you. It's one of those things where I guess if you walk out into the street and with a clipboard and ask people, you know, what do Guide Dogs do? Everybody knows. And in silly language, it's to help people who have visual impairment or blindness, the whole hog, get from A to B safely. We know that. Guide them down a road, show them where the curbstone is, etc., etc. This is a whole new ballgame.
Absolutely. So everybody knows about our iconic guide dog service, and you can see the lovely Ringo on the sofa there next to Josh. And it's an amazing service, provides life-changing partnerships for people. But we also do so much more, and that's what people don't know. So we have a huge range of children's services. So from the day a child is born, if a child has vision impairment, we have a range of services which can help that child. And similarly, we have a range of other adult services. So whether that's long cane training, helping people get the most out of technology, helping people with a sighted guide, so having a human guide instead of a canine guide. So we have all these other services, and we really want to raise awareness of those.
OK. Let me bring Josh in, and pointed out to me, which so rude of me that I didn't notice that within the picture as well as Ringo, your guide dog there, just over to your left, and excellent. How does it work? Because as I said to Emma, I completely understand that Ringo helps you get from A to B, from your front door, out into the street, safely across the road, etc., etc., etc. How does Ringo help you run your life more efficiently, more effectively, and indeed more pleasurably?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on today, Alastair. So Ringo has completely transformed my life in a number of ways. So as you mentioned there, it's not just about getting me from A to B. He actually gives me the confidence to get out and about, but it's that safety aspect of things as well. So he just makes me more confident when I'm going off to the shops or to work, and gives my family as well that comfort that I am actually going to be going somewhere independently and safely. But alongside that as well, he's just massively improved my life in so many different ways. And it takes away that anxiety when I'm walking around places and going into shops. I'm not there trying to struggle, trying to find a member of staff. Actually, staff and people in society always come up to me and offer me support whenever I need it. So it's really changed my life for the better. So it really is, at the pounding heart of it is confidence.
Absolutely.
And did you consult? I'm just going to put that question back to Emma, who, as you know, is with me in the studio. Who did you consult with to crack this, to know that was the way to go forward for people like Josh, that the ability to get from A to B safely builds confidence, and if you know that wonderful creature that helped you do that is with you there, it means that you can do so many other things. That's not just a guess from a clever woman like you and the rest of the gang at the charity. No. You must have talked to the experts too.
Absolutely. So we work very closely with a huge range of people with vision impairment on absolutely everything we do. We make sure that everything is really founded in that that deep understanding of what the community of people living with vision impairment in the UK need. And absolutely, we are about confidence, but we're really about helping people to live actively, independently and really well as well.
For those who are listening to what you and Josh just were saying on radio, which we do as well, we're just showing a clip here from that promotional film. And there's your man himself, and there's Ringo, how brilliant, and lots of other young children. It's not age specific. Some of those youngsters were literally underlined youngsters.
Absolutely, yeah. So Ralph, who you see in the advert there, is 10 years old, and actually he is a service user of our children's services. So he himself has got help with exactly the things that you can see in that advert. So long cane training can start from a very young age to help people to be able to get out and about, you know, just getting to and from school independently.
Josh,
Also,
through difficult and upsetting circumstances, you became a user is an ugly word, but you beneficiary, as it were, of guide dogs at a pretty young age as well. So there was a good deal of learning that you had to do as well.
Yeah, so I lost my eyesight at 15 years old, so it was quite life-changing, really, at 15. But the big thing, and just what's really articulated in the advert, is those life skills or those daily living skills that are taught in the video to the younger actor, and I received those services, and that gave me the confidence to go on to university, and then again accessing guide dog services later on in life when I felt comfortable and accepted my eyesight. I knew that I needed a guide dog after having been knocked over by an electric car. It really did notice to me then that I needed to really get in touch with guide dogs and really get some further support, which Ringo is obviously provided me.
It's utterly brilliant, and through you, give our love to Ringo. I know that those of us outsiders are not supposed to stroke or scratch, but there we are.
He fell asleep during the discussion on the economy, unfortunately, but I think he's just woke up, to be fair.
I know that feeling. That'll go in my CV. Final point to you. We are biased. I made that clear in my introduction, and so are you, because you work for the charity, and he is because Ringo's changed and improved his life so much. These creatures can detect illness. There was even a dog at Crufts recently that was doing CPR, showing that you can stop someone having a heart attack. Is there anything that dogs can't do other than fly?
Well, our dogs can do 36 amazing skills. That's how we train them in order to be guide dogs. And some of our dogs who actually turn out not to be suited for guiding. So, you know, we give the dogs that choice. We want the dog's well-being to be at the heart. Some of them do go on to be those other dogs. So they go and be medical detective.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
And Josh, if you're still there, thank you. And through you again to Ringo, thank you very much indeed. So Google it, look it up. It's all about helping those who are perhaps not quite as lucky as you and me, and hurrah, that's always a good thing to do. So to Josh and Ringo and to Emma here live in the studio, thank you all very much indeed. Do look it up. It's a fascinating little film, and you'll enjoy it as well. Now, we're going to take a quick break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.